name's Dan Mendelevitz, and welcome to Bridging of Ages. Today's topic is intergenerational dialogue. We are going to be talking about how different ages communicate with each other. Think about it. You have a base for what you like to do and how you like to communicate, especially with folks your similar age and experience. But how do you communicate with others, especially in the workplace, where it can become quite important that you get across the ideas that you feel are important and needing to understand what other people are doing. So a lot of times we look at the how, whether it's texting or different kind of chats and email and all those kind of things, but we don't think about the why. Why do people communicate differently? And I think it has a lot to do with experience and what you're used to and what you're open to doing. So people have a lot of misconceptions about communication styles, and a lot of that has to do with the fact that we make assumptions. We assume that maybe an older person can only do email. We assume that a younger person can only do chat or video communication. But that's not really true. And my experience has been in the workplace that when we start to communicate properly, we can really accelerate our innovation. So we think about technology being kind of the driver for our generational communication, but is it really? Maybe that is really what we're seeing on the surface. So what's really important is for us to understand what these misconceptions will be and how our communication styles are different. And we all know that in every age, the slang is constantly changing, and how we speak and the language of business and all those things are constantly evolving. So I was working on a project. I was managing this project. I had several people on my team, and there was this very intelligent young man, and he only communicated with text. And that was partly on me because I didn't set the scene. The interesting thing about it is he actually had the cubicle right next to me. So he would send me texts. He goes, this, and I would get a stream of them. And it really doesn't matter the platform, whether it was a Slack channel or Teams chat or anything like that, but he would send me a series of texts. But we weren't really communicating because it was only written down. So I stood up and I went to his cubicle and I just answered his questions. Yes, no, yes, no. And then I went back to my desk. A few minutes later, he came wandering over going, "What was that?" I said, "Well, I answered your questions, but I did it in what I am used to." And then we had a discussion over it. And what was really interesting is it was also a learning experience for me, because as I've said on previous episodes, and we'll see again in the future, what's really important is we have to get through these misconceptions. And we have to learn to communicate properly. So he was able to text me, and that was his primary way of talking to me. And I am more used to having actual discussions and sitting down and discussing them. And what he taught me is we needed to find something that was central to both of us. So we sat down with the whole team and we worked it out. Now, what's important is, of course, people have different channels, and you'll find it in any business and, of course, in your own social life, that we communicate differently. And you'll see it in the different ages and how it's done and what works for you. But how do you communicate outside that circle? And how do you do it properly? So there was a study done in IBM. And what they did is they looked for better ways to have their teams communicate that were of different generations, different ages. And what they did is, some of it was by digital platforms, some of it was by personal meetings, some of it was for setting up mentoring and reverse mentoring programs. And what they found is that what was really important is allowing people to have different kinds of communication and different styles, but to find the primary ones where it was critically important for everybody to communicate. So what we did on my project, learning from this, is we decided that we would have some Slack channels that would be for the most critical things that we had to do. If something was large, we would use email so that we were bringing the files and such over. If we had to communicate to other parts of the organization, we had to find what worked with them. But sometimes we had to put notes in the different things. But we didn't want to have to put things in multiple places, if at all possible. So I was okay with this younger person sending me text and stuff, but I said there will be points where we need to sit down face to face and talk. And that's how we went through it. So what's vitally important is that you find those communication styles. You know, whenever possible, you really want to mix that face to face, because we've all had that where, especially in a business setting, you send off an email and it's misinterpreted because it's just text. So that may be a time for a video call, or if at all possible, if you're in the same location, to talk to each other. It's vitally important that we find the why of it. So why are we having difficulty communicating with each other? Is it a language problem? Is it a technology problem? Is it just we don't understand each other because our experiences are so vastly different? And what I like to talk about on Bridging of Ages is how we can bridge those gaps and find really good ways to communicate. Because I truly believe that everybody has something to contribute at every experience level. And if we lose those mentoring situations and those ability to communicate with each other, it's going to break down. And I think you'll find this out in the world, not just in your job. You know, think about it. If you're starting, and if you wanted to start your own company or something, you need to communicate to a vast array of people. And it's important to understand their different styles of communication. I worked on a very large project that was international in scope, and eventually we ended up working in, over 100 countries. And their communication became really vital. And I had to find the different ways to communicate with people, not only on age, but culturally. And we did a similar thing. We created a central place where the critical communications would reside. We set it up on some Teams channels, and we were able to do that. And I was separated them by the different parts of the world and the different aspects they were working on, and coordinated it up so that it could be communicated to the executive level. Even within those, so what tends to happen is a lot of places, the executives tend to be a little older, and some of the other folks not as old. And we had to not only do different styles because of age, but also because of position. And this really comes back as the same thing. So it's vitally important that you look for why you're having difficulty communicating. Because if you don't know the why, you're not going to be able to fix the how. And at the same time, you have to give people some leeway. So I expect people of different experience levels to be able to communicate differently. And that's really okay. But when you have to work with other colleagues, it's really important that you find that way to communicate with them. So what I like to do is not only understand how I communicate, but I need to understand how the other persons communicate. And we need to find that place in the middle where we can understand each other. So let me give you some tips of some of this cross-generational communication. You really have to be flexible. You have to adapt methods to your audience. It's just like if you've ever seen a speaker on the stage. They're not speaking for themselves, they're speaking for the audience. And that's really important to know how to communicate with those folks, because what you say is not always what other people hear. Clarify your expectations. I talked a little bit about that. That's one of the things they found in the IBM study, is really what is that preferred channels, agree with them, find out where the critical channels are to make sure everybody's using that, and try not to put stuff in multiple places so it can't be found. And show respect. Be patient. Another person may not understand what you're trying to say, so find a different way to explain it, or a different way to communicate it. So without making judgments, it's important to do those different styles and communications. And we really want to bridge the gap. So like I said, if we're using those agreed upon channels for important message, and make sure everybody gets them and can respond to them, and not just sending massive emails all over with everybody in them, but a true communication. And knowing that critical juncture where maybe you have to get everybody in a room or in a video chat and move it to another level. And I think you'll find that with experience. But if you're open, you're flexible, you're clear, you show respect, and you look for bridging that gap, you will find your way into better communication. And you'll have that cross-generational communication, that intergenerational communication that will help you work together better. And as I've said before, and we'll continue to talk about, I truly believe that intergenerational teams are really the strongest. They create the most innovation. They give an opportunity for less experienced people to learn from those who have more, and from experienced people to learn from that beginner's mind and people who are seeing it for the first time. I can't tell you how many times I have mentored somebody and learned incredible things from that person. And I truly believe it has to be a two-way street. So look at, you want to look at these different kinds of styles, different kind of communications, and different kind of experience. Because it's very important that you get those down so that you can bridge those ages. So we talked a bit about the how, but we also talked a lot about the why. Why do you want to do it? And I think you can tell from these tips and from these stories that the why is exceptionally important, because you want to move forward. You want to be more productive. You want people to understand what you have to say. You want your voice to be heard. Those are all whys. The hows of it can be involved with technology, can be speaking face to face, can be learning the language of the other person. Those are all very important on how to get that how. So think about how you would take on those tasks. What we did is we actually talked it out. We had a series of sessions understanding how people communicate. And then we used them and we practiced them. So I had to learn how to text better and use Slack channels and those kind of things that I hadn't used earlier in my career. And the folks who were new to it had to learn how to do email, how to lead a meeting, how to put an agenda together, how to communicate with executives. All very important. And we were much more successful. And what was beautiful for me to see was the growth. The growth in people who were new to the profession, who were just learning in leaps and bounds. And we did it all in an environment of mutual respect. You were still expected to have your integrity. You were still expected to be accountable. And we all still had to get the work done. But we ended up doing it a lot more efficiently. And because we had worked with those various people with different experience levels and set up some mentoring and reverse mentoring sessions, we became much more innovative. We ended up, this project went over 2 years. And think about working that long on something that big. And the important part is we actually came in under budget and under time. And I think a lot of it had to do with the fact that we learned to communicate better. Because then I could utilize all the assets of my team, all the brilliance of my team. Because I knew through our communications that we were able to look at the problems in a different way. And what's really important is it allowed me not to just do top down, but to also do bottom up. And that for me was profound. It really showed me the strength of when we look at intergenerational dialogue, how we can enhance each other's lives with that. And in the workplace, to enhance each other's work. So we've talked a lot about, the why and the how and given some tips. We've covered a lot with intergenerational dialogue. And I hope you've seen some of the importance of why you want to move forward with it. And it really has a lot to do with just your respect of other people. If you can move aside your preconceived notions, your work on your unconscious biases, I think what you will find is that we can all communicate better. Because we have these tools now in order to do that. There's wonderful things coming out every day in technology, to the point where nobody's an expert anymore. But we can teach them to each other. We're not limited by age on what we can learn, only if we hold ourselves from not allowing ourselves to go forward. So think about bridging the gap, showing respect, the clarity of your communications, and be flexible. And especially with the clarity, remember, what you say is not always what that other person hears. So sometimes you have to reframe it to help them understand what you're saying. Before I give you some action items and some more tips, let's hear a word from our sponsor. Welcome back to Bridge Builder Bits on Bridging of Ages. Today's bit is on intergenerational teams. Intergenerational teams are always more productive. And why are they more productive? Because they bring a vast amount of experience levels. And because of this, we have greater innovation. And they can complete things much more efficiently. We have people's different experiences. When we learn how to integrate those and build on them and use them, we will all be more productive. So look for intergenerational teams to help your productivity. This has been another Bridge Builder Bits on Bridging of Ages. Welcome back. Let's take a look at some action items that can help you practice this and hopefully help you and your teams to accomplish better intergenerational dialogue. Are you listening? Are you listening or are you only hearing? Listen more, talk less. I think what's important is you want to listen what the other person is saying and ask the questions when you don't understand. The second action item. What is the preferred form of communications? How do you communicate best? And how do those who you are interacting with communicate best? Are you bridging that? We can use multiple channels. If one's not working, we can try another. Really look at how you can meld your styles. So when you're looking at your preferred form of communications, it can't just be yours. It has to also be the other people. And I think you can find a nice way in the middle. And as you're doing that, you can teach the other people how yours works, and they can teach you theirs. Another action item. The third action item is focus on what is common rather than differences. So if we look at our commonalities, all ages have something to contribute. And I always try to be open to that. We don't have a monopoly on the truth. It's really important to be open to that. What do we agree on? What do we differ on? And then, in order to help tie this down, what I suggest you do is try a role reversal. Step into each other's shoes. Try to communicate how they do and have them try to communicate how you do. And I think that will help you. That third action item will help you with the second one, which is to find that preferred middle ground. So it's really important that everybody has something to contribute. So to repeat, our three action items are listening, preferred form of communication, focus on what is in common rather than the differences. And now for a tip of the day. Practice active listening. What is active listening? Active listening is you or I really listening to what the other person has to say. What we usually do is we wait for our moment to say our piece. But while you're doing that, you're not actually listening. So do you listen to listen, or you listen to put in your own opinion? And your opinion is important when that time comes, but try that active listening. It's hard. But I think you will find that that will help that cross-generational communication. So remember, you are not your age. So today on Bridging of Ages, we discussed intergenerational dialogue. And next time on Bridging of Ages, we'll continue our discussion. And we're going to talk about building a culture. Well, pause. I lost it there. All right. Okay. Here are some action items to help you work on intergenerational dialogue. First action item is listening. Are you listening or are you only hearing? I think if you listen more and talk less, you will find yourself listening. And sometimes it's hard for us to do that, is to take that time to actually listen to what the person has to say. Because it's important that you understand their communication. And if you don't understand what they're saying, it's also important you let them know that. Because as I was discussing earlier, we found that our styles were different and that we didn't necessarily understand what the other person was saying. And we found a common ground. So are you listening or are you only hearing? Important point. So practice that. Action item number 2, preferred form of communications. We all have our preferred forms. And some of it because of age, and some of it is style, and some of it is just what our experience is. So you need to know how you best communicate, but you also need to understand how the others you interact with best communicate and find that common ground. Sometimes it takes multiple channels. And if one isn't working, you try another. But you have to have that critical one that everybody uses so that critical communication is not lost. Think about how you can meld your styles. Don't just stick with what works for you. Think about what also works for the other person. And they should be doing the same. And I think as a team, you will find that common ground for your preferred form of communications. Action item 3. Focus on what is common rather than the differences. All ages have something to contribute. And we need to know what we agree on and what we differ on. And as I said, you can try this role reversal, step into each other's shoes, and practice it. Because if you don't have good communication, your team is going to break down. And think about what are the most important qualities that you want to find in the other person to improve your intergenerational communication. We all have to have patience and empathy and curiosity. And those kind of pieces will allow us to do that. How do we become better listeners? I do it one way, another person could do it a different way. But I think we can find a common ground. I believe the younger generation has a responsibility to understand and find common ground with the older generation. But I also believe that the older generation has the same responsibility to learn from the younger generation. And I believe that that will help it be a two-way street and a two-way communication. We can find that common ground. So I think you can make, together, find a way to do that communication. So I want to give you one last tip of the day. Active listening. Hearing more and listening together. Active listening is you and I listening to the other person without wanting to interject. Because if I'm listening to listen is different than if I'm listening to put in my opinion. And it's hard. It takes practice. But you will find that you will actually hear what the other person has to say. and you will find that common ground. So remember, work on active listening, find that way of listening, communicate together what your preferred communications are. And I think if you focus on what is common, you will find less differences and have better communications. Today we talked about intergenerational dialogue. Next time on Bridging of Ages, we will be talking about building a culture of respect and empathy. I ask you to please subscribe to my YouTube channel. I am Dan Mendelevitz. We look forward to you joining us again on the next Bridging of Ages.